This is it. The Accessibly Anglican podcast. I've got new pants,
How?
gift card.
What was the store of choice?
Well, it was a gift card to like a few different places. These are Banana Republic.
Like a multi-store gift card?
Yeah,
Oh, wow. That's fancy.
yeah.
How did you choose BR?
I always like their stuff,
Okay.
but I never buy clothes. I never buy new clothes. If I get clothes, it's usually from the thrift store. But I've had a gift card for the past 7 months since Christmas.
Yeah.
And was like, today is finally the day.
But didn't they close their store down at the Summit in Birmingham?
Maybe. I went to the outlet.
Okay. Because I don't, I loathe shopping for clothes online.
Oh, yeah, it's terrible. It's worse than shopping for clothes in person, which I also don't enjoy.
They're both bad. Hey, there's a store in Birmingham, it's a men's store called Onward Reserve, that I don't like all their clothes. They tilt a little, there's nothing wrong with this, but they tilt a little bit more like frat boy.
You are a frat boy, though.
I was a frat boy.
I've seen you on the retreat. So every year our church goes on a retreat, and the first year I had been at the church for like 9 months at that point.
Yeah.
And I had always known Will and his button up and his collar, and he wears this very Anglican-looking tweed kind of jacket on Sunday morning. And I saw him in like Patagonia shorts and a backwards snapback hat. And I was like, who is this man? It's like, I feel like it's a window into the past. It simultaneously freaked me out, but also like amped me up a little bit. I was like, I like this. It's cool.
Cool. What are we talking about today?
I don't know. It was up to you. What are we talking about today, Will?
Well, I think we talked about two options,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe we can do both.
Mm-hmm.
Option one is what we just kicked off at our church, which is our series on service, drawn from the curriculum put together by Practicing the Way, which is a nonprofit focused on spiritual formation. You may know a guy named John Mark Comer. He helms that ship. Every 4 weeks at the end of the summer, our church goes through a particular spiritual practice before the fall kicks off in order to kind of calibrate our spirits and minds and hearts before we kind of go into the crazy of the fall. And so this year we are focused on service. I think last year we did generosity. The year before that it was silence and solitude. And so yeah, and it's interesting. Go ahead. What's funny?
Come to our church. We'll teach you how to be quiet. We'll teach you how to die to yourself. Give your money away. All those things that are drawing in the crowds.
Yes, they draw in everyone. Seemingly, somehow it's working. But
It's just the podcast.
It's definitely the podcast. I think what I was trying to say was that the practice we're doing this year is, I think, very fitting because our church is in a transition season, and we have ourselves this year been focused a lot on what it means to grow out. Just backstory for any of you who have no idea what our church is about. We are a newer church in Birmingham that is learning to, what we just simply say, practice the way of Jesus in and for this city, and to receive Jesus' grace along the way. But for the first couple of years, like any church plant, we were learning to grow up, what it meant to get established and put the systems in place for the church to thrive and flourish and get the right people in the right places. All that's kind of the growing up, becoming, going from like childhood to adolescence and adulthood. I don't know where we are on that spectrum, but this year we kind of made a pivot and said, okay, we've been doing a lot of growing up. What does it look like for us to grow out?
Let's talk about that. But we have to do the intro at some point. So that's what we're going to talk about today on Accessibly Anglican,
a podcast for the Anglo-curious.
Cue the theme. So, in order to make the conversation a bit more interesting, I'm gonna play. I won't say devil's advocate,
Yes.
but I'm gonna play the role of an outsider that's very skeptical. How about that?
Yeah, come on.
So we're talking about service. I think when a lot of people think about the services of the church, you think about like soup kitchens. I know a lot of the big old churches downtown will have like a soup kitchen,
which is awesome.
I believe they give out food outside of the Catholic Church downtown. You think about in Birmingham, we have a lot of historic Baptist churches that were part of the civil rights movement. That's very outward focused. We're a bunch of people in the back corner of Liberty Park. So what exactly is it that we can do that's outward reaching when you have to get in your car and navigate past a hotel and some offices to even find us?
You want me to answer that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
It's a challenge.
It is. You know, I think our church has been asking that kind of question, I think safely to say, for a couple years now. And I think there are two ways to answer it. I think one is to recognize that there are needs wherever you are. That even among the so-called most affluent areas of the city, there are issues that don't easily get seen on the surface. There are people whose families are a wreck, whose emotional lives are a wreck, who struggle with eating disorders, alcoholism. There's all the veneer of polite society is a veneer. And there are desperate needs within communities of affluence that I think it's easy to just discount because, they have the means to do whatever they want in life. And we know as Christians that's just not true. Money doesn't solve for the soul. It just it makes it easier to hide those things. So that's answer number one. Answer number two is we are a church that has been having an active conversation about what it means for us to take seriously the whole context of our city, not just the particular pocket that we're currently in. And we've been asking questions as we continue to grow literally out of the capacity of the space we're in and are actively asking what the next place is for us, where that might most appropriately be.
Yeah.
And
so my previous church was very much like the core mission was about being in the place that they were at. So you live in Vestavia.
Yep.
Our new studio is in Vestavia.
Yes.
Liberty Park is technically part of Vestavia, right?
That is right.
So are we staying in Vestavia? Is that the goal? Are we looking to be a Vestavia church?
We've always, so our tagline, and I just said it a minute ago, but our tagline has always been that we are learning to receive the grace of Jesus and to practice his way in and for this city, for Birmingham. So, I mean, while we have started in and been a part of Vestavia and may end up being in Vestavia, who knows? But that's never been the goal, is like we are a Vestavia. We love the people of Vestavia. I live in Vestavia, so a part of me will always be drawn toward the people around me because that's just my neighbors, right? But we have people at our church from every corner of the map of Birmingham. Most corners, not every, but most of them.
That is very true. Gardendale, down 280, Irondale, Hoover, yeah.
Homewood, Vestavia, other
I think
places.
We have some people in some weird direction, like almost towards way out east, don't we? Like Leeds.
Yeah, we have Leeds. Yeah, we basically just draw a circle around the city. That's kind of where our people come from.
Excluding the west part.
Yeah, exactly. So that's why
for now,
not
hopefully.
Yeah, for now.
Yeah.
So we are a church that is pulling people from all over, and that happens with the church plant, especially an Anglican church plant, where people are often looking for an Anglican church, and they may not all live in like one particular geographical area. And so the answer is no. Like, we're not beholden to one geographical area. And the question we've been asking as a church is there something about where we ultimately land, or at least for the next step of our church's journey, that may help facilitate us leaning into the way of Jesus.
So something I've been talking about with some of our members, I think that, and I don't want to say this in an exclusionary way because I do think we have some diversity, but for whatever reason, we have a lot of, like, I'm doing air quotes here, white liberals in our church.
You're so woke.
Yes, I'm very, that's as we've talked about on this podcast, Christianity very much defines your, fits you neatly into being right or left.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, Christians have to be one or the other.
Yes, it's extreme. For anyone who's not sure, that's extreme sarcasm. We've talked at length about how
joking.
You should look strange to both sides if you're following.
And we fairly, I mean, yeah, maybe we have a population here. We also have a counterbalance. I'm sure.
And I think I'm only sensitive to that because it's been different from me. Because churches that I've been at previously have skewed, usually more in a different direction.
Yes.
Point is, that group that I'm labeling as, even though it sounds a little bit charged, but the group I'm labeling is like white liberals.
Yep.
Of which I am pretty much a part. We love the idea of, like, I've been on mission trips to Africa, and, like, you try to be very aware of, like, white savior complex and not do that.
Yeah.
But I'm going somewhere with all this. My point is, do you think that it's somehow wrong? Because as you pointed out, there are churches in all types of communities for very good reason. Different communities have different issues. So is it a bad thing for us to want to do a more traditionally, I can't think of terms. All these terms have been charged with meaning that I don't necessarily intend, but like moving into a space where we can do more urban, again, air quotes, urban missions, because there aren't many homeless people in Liberty Park.
Sure.
There probably are some, but we don't see them around our church being in the back part of this, so is it wrong to desire that?
It's a great question. I think it's helpful to put this in historical context and understand the various attempts that white churches have made in doing the kind of racial reconciliation or racial integration, or just recognizing, like, hey, not all is well with the racial situation of our city. How do we deal with that? And there are different waves of that, right? And I think the most notorious, like the first significant wave of our, like, sort of era, lifetime, maybe just before our lifetime, depending on sort of when you were born. But, like, for me, it was like the late 90s, early 2000s, young, restless, and reformed movement, which had a lot of good things. Like, this is like the heyday of Caedmon's Call with Derek Webb, and that whole culture of, I think, rightly critiquing at the time sort of the plain evangelical Christianity that did not even think really about social issues.
Right.
And they were critiquing that, I think, rightly, and saying, guys, you've missed this whole other aspect to who Jesus was and what he talked about. And yet that movement, there was something about it that never sat fully at peace with me. It was very legalistic. It was very like, we're all going to move into this corner of the city and we're going to do this work, and there's going to be this kind of like divide between the real Christians over here who are doing the real work and all these like fake Christians that are just settling for vanilla Christianity.
Right. And if you take that to the extreme, then, like, there are wonderful believers in Mountain Brook,
right?
Which is a very affluent and
predominantly white.
Certainly not entirely, but largely white population. there are wonderful believers over there
right.
that are doing great work, and not. I actually struggled with this. The church I grew up in was fairly affluent, and when I sort of hit this, like I am older. I wasn't there for the late '90s, but when I sort of became aware of all this, and my political view, which we can get into this, I don't think it necessarily should be tied to politics. We should probably think about it differently. But when I started to have that shift as a young person, that a lot of people have in one direction or the other, I was like, oh, my church is useless. We don't have a soup kitchen, and we don't do this and that.
Yeah.
And then as I got a little older and a little more mature, I realized that the church I grew up in does we support so many missionaries around, like international missionaries, and that's something that like our church can't do, not yet. Anyway,
certainly
we don't have, the funds or the people or anything else to significantly support international missions, and so it's just a way of pointing out that like different churches have different calls, and that's okay. But back to my question,
and I think that's what
can we seek out? Is it okay for us to seek that out?
Is you have this first wave of these well-meaning, well-intentioned believers,
gung-ho,
very gung-ho, and I think it should be said, driven by a theology that often, if it's not set in the right context, can lend itself to a more legalistic spirit. But that legalism wasn't so much about like, not dancing with somebody too close or not drinking alcohol. It was more anchored around race. And a lot of that fell apart. And I think it's because the underlying theology was a bit uneven. And you had a lot of that generation of Christians are no longer Christians. Or if they are, their Christianity looks a lot different than it used to. And so that's one wave. I think the other thing to say is, even though there might have been some extreme elements in how they approached it, I do think some of, the heart was right and was there of like recognizing that the church should be more than just a personal devotion. The church should be more than just reading my Bible and going to a small group and worshiping on Sunday morning and maybe giving to the church and maybe giving to support some things, but like really not contending with the structural realities that inhibit shalom. And it's interesting because, at least from my own personal testimony, if I'm being fully transparent and honest, I think 6 to 12 years ago, how about let's just say 10 years ago, I think I would have been really leery of Will Schaeferman today. Like I would have been really leery of somebody talking about, hey, as a church, we should be thinking about the social realities that exist in our place and recognizing that part of our call as Christians is to contend with those and to seek wholeness and healing and unity. I think I would have been leery because perhaps for what I've seen in the past that went awry, but also I think it does sometimes smell of like a forced political thing. And for me, I arrived at the desire to see our church grow into a calling to step into the gap of like, what is it? There's some issues in our city. Namely, we've talked about this at our church, the racial bifurcation of geography. Like I live in an area, at least in Vestavia, that's almost 90% white and about 5% black. And if you go to the other side of town, it's almost 90% black or mixed, and it's 5% white.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and the reason, something that a word that I've actually not heard you say, that I think you're probably aware of, but while people technically have social mobility, we have a country that definitely allows economic and social mobility. We don't have like a ruling class. Exactly.
Sure.
I mean, we kind of do, but because of redlining in this city, the practice of barely legal predatory lending, or the lack of lending to people
Especially
of
early
color
on. Yeah.
after Jim Crow, they segregated the city, but legally after segregation technically ended.
And then even, I think we could say, even when that ended, because in the Fair Housing Act of, I think it was 88, the federal government was given the legal teeth to be able to prosecute people that were breaking that Civil Rights Act based in 1968 on housing and lending and mortgages and all that. That changed in terms of like what could fly legally. But at that point, so much of the patterns of residential segregation were entrenched.
Right.
And then you add on top of that just like, okay, generational wealth gaps, all of that. Anyway, the point is, I think my heart for this has grown not out of the abstract, but of the particular. I like when you just talk about social inequality and just these ideas in the abstract, it's really easy for them to become politicized. But I think a lot of my desire to contend for these things has grown out of simply living in a particular place and recognizing, man, there were some things that don't align with what I think God's desire is for this place. And I think there's so much opportunity. It's less from a place of deficit, like, oh, we're not this or that kind of Christian, and more opportunity. Like, I just think that there's so much more that God wants to do in a place like Birmingham that has yet to fully take place. And I just think about like the unfinished story of the civil rights movement, and even some of the ways that has maybe been peeled back a little bit, you know?
This might be a little hypocritical because I'm the one that has mentioned politics more than once already.
Sure.
But I think that something that you find, particularly in the South, that would surprise a lot of people that did not grow up in the South, is for a long time, there has been this sort of, especially among Christians, if you bring up politics, if you make it a right and left thing, people will dig their heels in very quickly.
Yeah.
But if you make it particular, like you're talking about, so many people would do anything for their neighbor, regardless of their race.
Yeah.
And they might, on the boat with their buddies, they might say some things that they probably shouldn't.
Sure.
Make jokes that they shouldn't, or hold some beliefs about, people just need to pull themselves up by the bootstraps or whatever it is. But the fact of the matter is, those same people, while they may not say the right things, when it comes down to it, they would absolutely do anything for their neighbor. One example is, I know somebody who has strong feelings about immigration, but I also know that they have an illegal immigrant at their church. And I said, okay, let me ask you this. If ICE came, knocking and was looking for your friend Luis, what would you do? Would you hand them over to ICE because you don't agree with illegal immigration, or would you protect them because they're your brother in Christ? And it looked like their head was about to explode. But they knew the truth was they would do anything for, it's their, it is your brother in Christ. And that kingdom, I think for true believers, I think that that question is clear, that our allegiance falls to the kingdom of heaven before the kingdoms of this earth.
Sure. Yeah, and I think, way to open up a can of worms with legal immigration, by the way. We've talked about that in the first edition of this podcast. So if you want to learn more about our thoughts on immigration, go back to, I think it's like episode 19 or something. But I think trying to get back to your initial question of, is it right? Is it wrong? What is our church? How does our church think about this? I think what we want to do is take stock of where we are as a city. And as I preached about a couple of weeks ago, where is shalom happening and where is it not? Where is the kind of human flourishing and societal flourishing that we know God's heart is oriented toward? And what is inhibiting that? And then what does it look like for us to stand in the gap? Not to go off and be the savior, but what does it look like for us to be a part of moving toward wholeness and shalom? So that's the answer. And I think to that end, if there is a place geographically that enables us to do that more effectively, I'm all for it.
Well, and I'm going to jump out of the role of the question asker and offer an opinion on this that I've thought about. Yeah. And again, something I've talked about with some people in our congregation. I think that to answer my own question, if I can,
please.
I think that if you try too hard to make that happen, it can be, to borrow a millennial term, it can be very cringy.
For sure.
If you move your very affluent white church into a poor, neighborhood that has very few white people, and you try to come in, we sing, gospel-y songs, and
sure. Totally.
And we want you here because of your race. That gets really uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But the flip side is, I think the answer is to truly listen in the Spirit.
Yeah.
And,
where are you being called?
And if God is leading you to that, I don't think there's anything wrong with being excited about it.
Yeah.
Because I went through a strong phase of wanting to do this and never really having the opportunity. And then, like I said, I sort of realized, you serve where you're put, and that can look like a lot of different things. But at the same time, if I do get to be a church that was, and I'm going to interject on myself here real quick and say, we brought up the question of serving, and it almost immediately became about race. But I do think that's a reality of our city.
Sure.
I think that on the one hand, I think that people, again, that haven't lived in the South, that haven't lived in Alabama, would be surprised by how integrated society is. But at the same time, there are still divides, some of which are more obvious than others. But that said, I think if we did have an opportunity to have the most immediate or most obvious fleshing out of that picture of that would be just having a multi-ethnic church.
Yeah.
And ideally one that also has, even though we all come together under this umbrella of Anglicanism, ideally one that has different spiritual denominational backgrounds.
Yeah.
Because I think we see over and over again that is ultimately the picture of where we're headed. All tribes, all nations.
And again, if I could stop you.
Yeah.
That language 10 years ago would have really raised my eyebrow. Because again, I'm trying to put this in two categories. I think you're doing a really good job of trying to put this in the language of a certain subset of the population politically. And I'm also thinking about, okay, the people that are listening right now, how can we understand this if you're on a different side of the political aisle? And I think, again, 10 years ago, I think my eyebrow would have raised, because I'm like, is that just basically affirmative action in church form? Or is that a forced integration that it feels like you're just being pressured to do something, whatever, whether for good or ill. I think what we've tried to talk about, what I preached on 2 weeks ago, and again, I'm referencing this one sermon. Go back, and if you're able to listen, it's called Seeking Shalom. But what we talked about is secular forms of what we would call shalom can only get you so far.
Right.
Politics matters, and legislation matters, and how we think about issues from a systemic standpoint matter secularly. But if you want to change the heart of a city, if you want to see integration of human beings that are different and putting us toward Revelation 7 like you just described, it has to begin and continue at the level of the church. And I think the reason we're talking about these things is if you want to see wholeness, if you want to see healing, if you want to see forgiveness for past wrongs done, and for there to be true, let's say it, progress in a place, then it has to be done first and foremost within the context of God's agent of healing, which is the church. And so I think that's why we are asking the question as a church community, what does it mean to lean into that work as as a response to an invitation? I think that's probably, and you enumerated this or made this clear a minute ago, but just to make it that much more explicit, this is, as we're thinking about it, this is not something that we're just doing to justify ourselves. It's not something that we're trying to like put a good badge on our shoulders for. Honestly and genuinely, it feels like just a response to an invitation from God. And that's the weird thing about it. Like, we might have been called toward like a group of CrossFitters and we couldn't explain it, and we just felt like that's where we need it. But I feel like God is stirring our church to contend for the places, especially from the broken places of our city from the past.
Right. So, and in this particular city,
yeah,
that
a
is
lot of
largely
that takes on racial
yes
context.
And I think that, kind of going back to what I was saying about, I think people would be surprised by individual attitudes because of the broadly like racist view that people have of the South. People do really think that way. It's
sure.
a little insulting, but it's true. Like, people think that way, and I think that's why people would be surprised by the attitudes of individuals.
Yes.
And that said, I think that regardless of your political leanings, I think that people in the church and people in our church want to see that. I know that's why
I think that's right.
I want to. I would love it if our church was not homogenous. And again, it looks a lot like race, but it's also economic, regardless of race. And again, like spiritual background, just diversity, because that is a picture of the broader church.
Yeah.
And I don't want that in a performative way. I just know from personal experience that having a diversity of friends, a diversity of people working together is stronger, especially in a Christian context. Because...
And can I give you an example?
Yeah.
To cut you off?
Yeah.
and this is going to sound like, perhaps, and forgive me ahead of time, sound like the most white thing I could say.
Oh, no.
Okay, right? But like, there is a level of joy that I have that is different qualitatively when I'm around Black people. Does that make sense? Like, meaning, like, there's, C.S. Lewis talked about his circle of friends, and there were two of his closest friends, Charles, what's his last name? It starts with an M. Charles and Tolkien, right? And they got together regularly. There was something about Charles that was different from the other two because they were different people. Charles drew something out of Tolkien that Lewis could not. And when Charles died, and it was just Tolkien and Lewis left, Lewis immediately noticed a difference in his manner and who he was, Tolkien, because the part that Charles could draw out of Tolkien was missing. And so all that's to say is that, like, diversity isn't just like a thing unto itself. There's just a reality that, like, different people in different cultures draw something out of us that don't exist in any other way. Similar to when I went to Kenya when I was 18 on a very typical mission trip. We didn't do anything like, oh, let's go save. We were just like, let's go fellowship with other Christians. I kid you not, that 2 weeks that I was in Nairobi, hanging out with just kids at a local school, it was maybe the happiest 2 weeks of my life, because it was people that I don't normally interact with who drew something else out of me because of who they were, because of their culture, because of just their context. And it just, there's a joy that I just think we are missing. There's an opportunity cost by being homogenous.
Well, there's also just a reality, again, if we want our city to reflect a microcosm of, if we want our church to reflect a microcosm of our city, this city is extremely diverse, ethnically, politically,
Yep.
culturally, and economically.
Yeah.
And in order to have that fullness in our church, we need that representation. And I think that it both provides opportunities to serve and also just brings out the best in everyone.
Yes.
Because
and paints a picture for the coming kingdom that's compelling to those that currently do not believe in Jesus.
Again, going back to when I was younger and very fervent about such things, maybe to a fault at times.
You were like a post-young, restless and reformed guy.
Something like that, yeah. I spend a lot of time, and I found that this is very surprising to a lot of my friends that are believers, because I still do. A lot of my closest friends are not believers, and live life very differently from me, and they're surprised that I'm able to. This almost sounds like a humble brag. I don't really mean it to be, but I'm just saying genuinely, like, I received a comment on this recently. They were surprised that, like, some of my best friends live life so differently from me. And it was actually easier for me to say, well, stuffy, rich white people, they're more likely to be spiritually bankrupt than poor, gay atheists or whatever, because I received a lot of warmth and friendship from people like that.
Sure.
And it was actually, I think it's different for a lot of people. I had to kind of go the reverse path and realize how wonderful and how much God can use. Again, just all kinds of people. I just sort of took the opposite path than I feel like a lot of people take. And then I realized at one point, I was like, I think that my mission that God has given me is to make both sets of people realize the value and the good in the other set.
That's right.
Because I feel like I really do.
You can uniquely stand in the middle.
I feel like I sit in the middle. And I guess that's sort of the goal for us as a church, which is what's so exciting for me to be a part of this church, but is to do that.
Yeah.
And I feel uniquely positioned at the middle to hopefully bring those groups of people together. So I'm gonna shift a little bit.
Come on.
Because we've talked about a lot of other stuff, but it's really about service.
Practice.
The practice.
You talking about practice?
Yeah.
I'm talking about practice.
It's the practice of service.
Not the game. Not the game. Practice. We're talking about practice, Andrew.
Are we talking about practice?
We're not even talking about the game. We're talking about practice.
Is this a reference?
I hope that you know this one.
I don't know this one. No.
Oh. The original was Allen Iverson, when people got onto him for not showing up to practice. And he has this incredible 2.5-minute monologue.
I have seen this.
I think I showed it to you.
Yes.
But then I only realized recently after we've been rewatching Ted Lasso in anticipation of the new series coming out. And I forgot that there was a spoof on that Lasso does to one of his players. And they never mention it in terms of, but it's like he rehearses almost verbatim what he says. And it's just practice. It's really good.
So, what does it look like for us to serve? What does it look like for us to serve now that we're in this corner of Liberty Park? And what would it look like for us to serve if we were able to move into a more diverse area?
Yeah.
Because I've mentioned to you, I feel this hope and maybe a calling that we will find unique ways to serve. And I've also mentioned, I'm going to get real controversial on it for all our 12 listeners real quick, that the mainline churches that have had a very progressive theology, some of which to an extreme degree where they will deny what we would consider core tenets of Christianity, such as the bodily resurrection of Christ, they're doing wonderful things for their communities. And I don't understand why the little o Orthodox churches, meaning any, Nicene affirming
Yeah.
Trinitarian churches, why are we so unconcerned with service? Why has it become it's become almost like a political football, where it's like, well, if they're going to do that, then we're not. Yeah. And I'm like, that's weird.
Because humans are reactionary by nature.
And it's terrible, because we should be able to proclaim the true gospel while also doing incarnate physical acts of service.
That's right. And I think we should name the understandable piece of it, which is, I think you could argue that in some cases, the churches you just referenced, the more progressive that are doing great things for them, in many ways, it's like we exist for that reason. Like, we are basically just a service organization, which has its place, right? Service organizations are awesome. Like, our church wants to partner with them. But the reaction on the other side is the church is not primarily just a service organization. It's also proclaiming this thing called the gospel, right? And again, it's bifurcating those, but
they're both holding half of the
that's right.
of the pieces.
It's understandable how those reactions happen and how they widen over time, because they're both, it's like a nuclear reactor, right? Like, they're just constantly like banging back and forth against each other. And again, we've been talking a lot about this, hinting around it, but I think we should name it as we're going along. The name of this podcast is Accessibly Anglican. One of the, I think, spiritual callings, one of the unique pieces of equipment that God has given to the Anglican Church, is to be able to comprehend the various elements that often are isolated otherwise. And so, like, we are a church that can bring in the Catholic, the evangelical, and charismatic streams of the church, which are often separated. We're also a church that can bring together two sides of the theological coin, between like preaching the gospel and caring for the poor. And right, like, those things. And again, like, not every church is like fully one or the other. There's often some kind of overlap. But I think we have a unique ability to do that, because there's something about the DNA of Anglicanism that comprehends versus particularizes around one of those things.
Well, something else too that we have talked about on, I don't know, an episode way back, is that there is this thing, especially in like American evangelicalism, where we hold the Spirit in such a high regard that we can dismiss the body. And we believe in this incarnate theology. God could have just like intervened and come down and saved us, but for whatever reason that we don't fully understand, he decided to become a person and to suffer, and not just to suffer, but to make friends and to laugh and to eat and to cry and eventually to suffer death. And I think it's because it makes it more meaningful to us, who our whole framework is physical. And so when we try to make it so spiritual, we lose the physical realities. And the church has been set here to proclaim the gospel. And also, what is
the gospel?
What did the early church do? They fed people.
And that was part
Paul
of it.
admonished people who were like eating all the food before the poor people could get there.
Yeah.
But it was also to proclaim the truth. It was always both.
And I think I would take your point and press it even further and say, I'm not sure if God could have saved us but for becoming a human. Meaning, there's this famous quote from a church father, I think it's Tertullian, but I'm going to get that wrong probably. And it's this: no, it's not Tertullian. It's one of those early church fathers. Whatever is not assumed cannot be healed. Meaning, and by assuming, he means like assuming human flesh, taking on human flesh. Whatever is not taken on cannot be healed. So if you don't, as God, if you don't take on human form, then you can't go and heal humanity. You can't heal human beings. And the reason I think that pushes your point even further is the salvation story was necessarily incarnate. It was necessarily embodied because it was dealing with real human beings. It was dealing with the whole human being. And I think there's nothing but gospel truth in saying that our call as Christians is to be whole Christians. Like, we are called to deal with the spiritual realities that exist in people's lives and the incarnate, bodily, practical, material realities. Those things come together in the gospel. And we've lived in an era where even a lot of, quote, like white churches acknowledge it. I think this is the point that we, as we start to close, needs to be acknowledged. There are lots of churches in what we would call over the mountain Birmingham. White churches that live in the suburbs, et cetera, that would disagree with almost nothing that we've said.
Sure. It's not all radically new or anything.
What I would say is most of them either just don't think about it day to day. They don't disagree. They just don't have time to think about it, or they don't take the time to think about it, or it's just so overwhelming that they don't know how to deal with it. Like, the problem of, like, how in the world do you deal with, like, long-standing issues of racial bifurcation in the city of Birmingham? Like, that's so overwhelming, and the reason it exists is because of people that came before us that we didn't have anything to do with. What, like, we might, if you live in the suburbs, you know, like, you might get the blessings and benefits that come materially from, like, living in that space, but you didn't, like, redline, you didn't, like, make the political decisions, whatever. What I would say is, I don't think there are a lot of people that disagree with this. They either just don't think about it because it's like, I'm just distracted by all the things, we're all distracted, or it's too overwhelming. What I would say is, I think there's a whole subset of people that if you simply hold something out for them and say, guys, we're moving in this direction, come join us. Like, we don't have all the answers, but we sense this call and we're gonna figure this out together. I think there are a lot of people that would respond to that. And here's the thing, my sense is, even if our church, let's say just theoretically, were to find a space in the city, right? If that were to be true, I would not think it would also have to be true, ergo, like those other waves of this, that everyone then needs to, like, move from the suburbs into the city. I think that actually that would be the wrong decision, because the whole idea is that you're trying to bridge gaps. You're trying to bring people together, which requires, like, that the places where there's bifurcation, that those are transformed.
One very, like, overly specific, and me and Will have been talking about the fact that I tend to focus in on tiny details. But one specific example of that would be, is if you have a lot of people with a lot of means, you know, trying to move into a less affluent area, you're taking up housing and resources that those people then have to pay more for. You might raise property taxes and everything else.
And so I think, like, that's not the answer. In fact, and I think that's the freeing part of it. Like, there may be costs that go with it, and I'm sure there will be. But I think there are more people that I think are perhaps even before they even are aware of it, are primed for something like this. Of, like, we want to see Shalom come to our city. And we think that that would do something really remarkable for this place. And it would bring about a kind of kingdom vision and picture of the kingdom that we would all welcome. I think there's a lot of that. I just don't think people know how to, or they're too afraid, or they just don't think about it. But once you put it in front of them, they're like, yes. Sure.
My final thought, going back a step, again, to sort of answer my own question, is you were talking about how it almost had to be done incarnate. Similarly to my point of, like, is it weird or wrong? I think
it was Athanasius, by the way. I think that was the guy.
Okay. Is it weird or wrong to, you know, desire to be a part of that kind of church when, as we've established, there are lots of different kinds of churches that are doing different kinds of work? And maybe it could be a little bit cringy, but again, I think that's just part of us being humans. And you think about the Sons of Thunder, which two, I can't ever remember, which two apostles were they?
James and John.
Yeah, James and John.
Sons of Zebedee.
Yes. the Sons of Thunder was a little bit pejorative, right? Because they were so overzealous that they were ready to like kill some people for Jesus.
Yeah.
And he was like, I like it, thank you, but let's calm down a little bit. But you know, they were still used in wonderful ways. And so if we're a little overzealous about wanting to do what's right, I think that's okay.
Sure. Yeah. Don't do something just because it could come across as cringy, but at the same time try to avoid cringe as much as possible.
We'll try to not be cringy. I'll tell you, here's a fun anecdote. So I'm 29.
Yeah.
I'm some of the oldest Gen Z. Like I'm kind of right on the cusp of millennial Gen Z. And one time when I was working at a different coffee shop than the one I work at now, I said something was cringy, and a bunch of high schoolers started making fun of me and calling me unk. Because
so
I said
what is
the
their word for cringe?
I don't know. I don't know what.
I think I learned this from Abby Jones, who's in our church the other day. There's a word that she used, which was like kind of the same as cringy, but it was like Gen Z slang. I think it was something like, what is the name of it? It's what people use to describe what a millennial is. Chuggy. Thank you. I was like, help me understand what that means. And the way she was describing it, I was like, I think you just mean cringy.
Yeah, but it's specifically millennial cringe.
Which is
like,
fine.
Like calling a dog doggo or friendo.
Which is funny because here's the thing. There are so many of these like monikers that I know zero millennials that use that I think it's like how pejorative terms get like created. Like very few people actually do this, but the Gen Zs are like, we're going to make this word up and say that they say these things and make fun of them for it. It's like, I know nobody that says doggo. Who doggo?
Oh, I know a lot of people.
Or like, and I know nobody that has the, live, life, laugh, or live, love, laugh. You know, these are like the.
You don't?
I know zero people who have
Okay, if
those.
you say so.
I truly do. I know no one.
See, this is where I get to stand in the gap, bring together the Gen Z and the millennials.
Introduce me to a friend that has a live,
I think
love,
we've
laugh.
bullied them all off the face of the earth. I don't think anybody does it anymore because we have relentlessly bullied them.
I genuinely think y'all have made these things up.
I'm not entirely sure you don't have a live, laugh, love sticker somewhere in your house, Will.
Again, this shows the distance between us and the determination of the Gen Z movement to feel like they're somehow included by knocking us down a notch or two. Anyway,
it had to be done.
Editor's note. At the end of each podcast episode, if there are corrections that we want to make to the episode before, there may be ones that we want to make for today. I need to make a note. We are sitting here in my wife's amazing office, Seeds Pediatrics, who's actually having their ribbon cutting today.
Woohoo!
And for the Chamber of Commerce.
Are they going to use the giant scissors?
I hope so.
Oh,
They've got to, right? Like,
yeah.
They got to have like red ribbon and scissors. Anyway, that's happening today. We talked last week about, I think the question was, is there any such thing as a non-zero sum game when it comes to good in the world? Like every good thing often has a cost. And I think I pushed back a little bit and I said, well, let's take the example of my wife's practice. Like she left a traditional insurance-based practice and started this sort of direct primary care concierge model. There are a lot of reasons for that for our family. She was burned out. It schedule-wise made it really hard for her to be a mom in the way she wanted to be. And the way that insurance-based medicine drives primary care providers to do things that are on the edge of what is right and wrong. There's a lot of sort of like gray area of like, this shouldn't be allowed. Anyway, so for all those reasons, she made the shift to this model, which is there's a wave of this happening. And she's able to give time and attention and care to her patients in ways she never was able to before. It's highly conducive to just like people getting the care they need conveniently and with thoroughness, etc. It's a win-win for everyone involved. The only cost that I didn't actually mention, that I don't think I fully was able to articulate when we talked, was there's a necessary cost to her leaving the insurance-based world. which is she had, let's say, I don't know, 1,200 to 1,500 patients on her panel before, which again, how do you care for that many? I don't know, but at least you're like doing something for them. When she moved here, it's 200 patients. And so there's that gap of about 1,000 patients that she is no longer caring for. Now, another doctor is doing it, stepping in the gap and like just taking over those patients. But the point is, if everyone went to this model, there would need to be some attending structural changes to medicine so that more and more people could be cared for. I think that's solvable, but it needs to simply be named.
There's still a cost.
There's still a cost. Yeah. But that being said, I wanted to include that. And again, if there's anything from this episode that we want to make an editor's note on, we'll do that next episode.
As always, if you want to comment or contact us or whatever, we'd love to hear from you and tell us why we're wrong.
Or right. Or why you love Andrew Panic and his mustache.
It's because I trim it. But anyway,
yeah.
We're gonna try to fall into this rhythm, podcast every 2 weeks.
Yep.
And we're excited to be back into it.
When does this one go live, Andrew?
That's a great question. I don't know. But when they're hearing this, it will already be live. So it doesn't matter. So yeah, we're back. We've obviously changed formats. We already answered everything there is to know about Anglicanism.
Yep.
So now we're just going to spout off our opinions. And if you want to listen to that for some reason, we'll be here. So until next time, this has been Accessibly Anglican,
a podcast for the Anglo-curious.